listening to people talk, I realized that I wanted to begin at a certain point, but I needed to begin at a different point. So please bear with me, because my topic is to talk about the Mahayana schools and the how Mahayana Buddhism developed and how time.
This thing right here is.
Oh, do you read it?
Yeah.
You should.
It's blocking the screen.
I don't read it. Yes.
Photos. That one.
Guidance is she.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We didn't know that.
And there are, of course, different languages that were related to here in terms of Pali and Sanskrit and Chinese. And like most Westerners, we have a lot of challenges when it comes to pronunciation. And so I defer to Kathy and Master and others who speak Chinese fluently to help us out in this regard. Some of the terms in Pali and Sanskrit, I'm going to be using the pronunciations that were taught to me by Dan Lusthouse, who is a scholar from Harvard and who pronounced things differently than I did. And as I learned to pronounce things along with him, he kind of helped me out a little bit, but I'll try to give you some of the more colloquial pronunciations, but then give you the more authentic pronunciations as well. So terms like Madhyamaka and Yogacara and things like that, I will, and words like Nagarjuna, which a lot of Westerners call Nagarjuna. So the pronunciation that Dan Lusthouse uses is Nagarjuna. So I defer to him in terms of his pronunciations. So I want to start off with a little bit about what it means to be a Dharma teacher. Because we've been talking a lot about learning all this material, and I wanted to say a few words about this. And as in the Eightfold Path, a good teacher cultivates the qualities of right speech, action, and livelihood. So as we are thinking about becoming Dharma teachers, one of the things that's important is to study and investigate and practice and notice when you're having difficulty with right speech, with right action, with right livelihood, to learn about these things and to say, okay, if I'm going to actually be helping other people along the path, I need to be the path. So not just to know it here, but to have it in the heart as well. So to be able to do it in practice. And when we see a good teacher, we need to understand the qualities that a good teacher has. And I may be talking about that from time to time throughout our roots together. As in the 7 factors of enlightenment, a good teacher cultivates his or her mindfulness practice. I'll talk a little bit more about mindfulness and meditation. We also need to be able to cultivate our ability to investigate, to be able to have awareness and insight into what the meaning is of what we're practicing, how to see it in our daily life in the moment. When an event occurs, how do we apply the practice? How does that help us to be able to decrease our own suffering and the suffering of others? This is very important. How, and also, is what we're doing helping us in our joyfulness and our tranquility? If the practice isn't helping us with our joyfulness and our tranquility, we may need to sit down with Master or one of the teachers to say, I'm learning all of this, but I don't see any benefit in terms of my joyfulness or my tranquility. That's not improving. And so we need to be able to see this growth within ourselves. And also, a good teacher studies and practices and realizes the Dharma. Not just keeping it in the head, but also having a direct realization to have these say, oh, now I understand it in my core being. It's beyond words. I know it myself. And then that gives you confidence that what it is that you're doing is on the right path. And then also a good teacher is generous with the teachings. A good teacher does not hold back in its generosity. He's able to give in a free way, but also is skillful in knowing what to say, when to say it, and when to keep silent. This is a very important quality of a good teacher. So we want to learn these qualities as we're practicing. We need to also remember when the Buddha gave instructions, he usually started with generosity and morality. He didn't start with the highest concepts for most people. He didn't talk about the noble truths until a person really began to understand the meaning of generosity and the meaning of morality. Generosity, 3 levels of generosity. The material generosity of being able to give food or money or things like that when needed to be helpful. The generosity of giving the teachings to help a person's mind when they're suffering. And also the generosity of giving no fear, of the person feeling safe in your presence, so that the person is not frightened. And they're facing difficulties, that they don't respond with fear, but that they respond with a certain level of confidence. This is very important. And the Buddha taught this as a foundation. And also, as Master spoke about the foundation of moral practice, of the precepts, Bodhisattva vows, and the monastic code. So just as a little bit of a background in terms of mindfulness and meditation, sometimes people use these terms interchangeably, but there's an important distinction between mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness, as we will see, is the intentional, non-judgmental awareness in the present moment. It's being in the here and now. Meditation is a formal practice that we do to cultivate our mindfulness. And we can practice this as sitting on the cushion, in standing meditation. We can practice it in walking meditation as we do on it together as a group or individually. Also laying down meditation for when a person is sick or dying. These 4 postures, very important. The Master has been teaching about Satipatthana and the mindfulness of the body, and he's going to provide us with more information about mindfulness of feeling in the future. So, when we practice formally, we focus without distraction on the body and mind. And this is the contemplative practice of meditation. When we practice informally, we're mindful in every moment, even when we're washing dishes or sweeping, whatever we do, we're mindful, we're paying close attention to what we're doing. So formal practice helps us cultivate our informal application of mindfulness. This is why we practice in a formal way. John Kabat-Zinn is a very good Western teacher who applied mindfulness practice to people with pain and anxiety and depression at the University of Massachusetts. His definition of mindfulness is quite good. He says that mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. And so this is very, very helpful to see what our mindfulness practice means. In the words in Pali for right mindfulness, mindfulness can be practiced in incorrect ways. There are people who are mindful when they are robbing a bank. People who are mindful when they're in the service as a sniper. They're paying very close attention. But the mindfulness that we're wanting to cultivate is what we call right mindfulness. This is samasati. Sati meaning mindfulness. Sama meaning right. In Chinese, the word is zhengyan. Zhengyan means right mindfulness. And this is the Chinese character for nian. Nian is a picture of a person looking through a triangle. This is the moment. And there's a little hook on the moment. And under the hook, this is the heart and mind. So it's the heart and mind in the moment. This is Nian. If we unhook the heart and mind and we hook the character for money onto this character, we would have a different character. Tan, this is the character that means greediness. So just as Master spoke before about how the monastics are not focused on money, this is because it leads to greediness. So this is, we want to be careful about that distinction. So here, Tan, how am I doing so far? Okay. So on our formal practice of meditation, this helps us cultivate our mindfulness in every moment. So this is the character of meditation. This character took me a long time to understand. On one side, this is a picture of a person holding onto a broom. Oh no, this is a pitchfork. I'm sorry, this is a pitchfork, and the person is screaming. So a person screaming at you with a pitchfork. This doesn't sound very meditative, does it? So you have a person on the other side. This person is very grounded and they have a view from above. So this person is able to transform. So this means to transform our mind so that we can deal with the assault of the worldly sufferings. Because sometimes it feels like the world is coming after you with a pitchfork, someone screaming at you. That's what it feels like sometimes. Very subtly sometimes. You get a pitchfork stuck in you. Yes. So if you're able to transform that, this is very, very helpful. Yes. So, the Eightfold Path, you all have familiarization with the Eightfold Path, divided into the three parts of wisdom, morality, concentration. When the Buddha taught it in this way, remember that he spoke of this in this order because he was talking to his 5 companions who he had been with for 6 years. When the Buddha left his companions to go and sit under the Bodhi tree, he had his great enlightenment, and he came back to his 5 good companions. He already knew that they had a strong moral practice. He already knew that they were able to go into deep states of concentration. All they needed was the final peace. So as he spoke about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 Links of Dependent Origination, each one of them in a few hours became enlightened. Most of us are not quite there. We're not going to hear that and suddenly become enlightened, perhaps. So, and the people that we speak to are not going to just hear the Four Noble Truths and suddenly become enlightened. That's why we have to start with understanding how to present and demonstrate generosity. So the word Sama in Chinese, Zheng is a very good character. It's because many people want to use the term right to translate this. Right is okay translation, but it's different than the term right and wrong. It's actually a picture of a person walking on a path. They come to the edge of a cliff and they stop from themselves from going over the edge of the cliff. Don't go over the cliff. That's the message. So it's right not to go over the edge of the cliff, but it's not a question of right or wrong. It's the question of it just makes sense. Don't go over the cliff. Wholesome, unwholesome might be a better translation. Now, interestingly enough, the words that is used often in Chinese sometimes in a conjunction of words, but sometimes by itself to represent the term shamatha, which means, that's the Pali word for calm, abiding in the mind. This word sama comes up, and jung comes up. This is the mind that is calm and can see when you don't want to go over the cliff. So the mind is clear, can see, oh, there's danger here. Be careful. Don't go over the edge of the cliff. Another term that's used in conjunction with meditation is the word vipassana. You've heard this word oftentimes. People go to vipassana retreats. In vipassana retreats, they practice a lot of shamatha, right? First they do that, then they have insight. Insight in the Chinese is the word guan. This is one of my favorite words, guan. This is the word that means to investigate, to see clearly. But it's a picture of, and it's also found in the words guan yin. You know the guan yin here. The one who listens to the sounds of suffering in the world, Avalokiteshvara. This is the bodhisattva of compassion. The word guan is a picture of a heron. A heron, you know, you can't get very close to a heron. You try to get close to a heron shrieks, flies away. But this particular heron is calm, his own nature, so much that you can go right up to the heron and you can talk about your suffering to the heron, and he'll stand on one leg and he'll listen to you. This is the mind that has been that calm and has that kind of great insight. So, of course, we know about the bodhisattva path. This is what my job is to help us to understand how the bodhisattva path can work for us. And, of course, this is the picture of the Guan Yin from the St. Louis Art Museum. If you've not gone to see the Guan Yin at the St. Louis Art Museum, it's one of the best Guan Yins in the whole United States that I've ever seen. Very, very beautiful, life-size. So please go and visit the museum. We're very fortunate here. Our museum is free. You go to other places. Chicago, you get into the museum there, it's like $18. You go to the museum in New York, $25. So we're very fortunate. It's free. We can go in, no problem. So you can go visit the Guan Yin next time you're in Forest Park. So Bodhisattva, you saw, there are 3 types of bodhisattvas. The first type is the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the early lives of the Buddha prior to his enlightenment. It's talked about by the Buddha in some of the suttas and in the tales that are told about his prior incarnations. This is the original meaning of the word in the Pali text meant this is a person who is on the road to becoming a Buddha. There are also legendary bodhisattvas. These are in the Mahayana tradition of the 4 great bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara or Guan Yin, Samantabhavra, Kittigarbha or Dizang, we have the Dizang Hall here, and Manjushri. Wushu? Who is it in Chinese? Manjushri.
Wensu.
Wensu San. Okay. Yeah, so Manjushri also, so compassion and wisdom, really very important for the cultivation of the mind on the Mahayana path. This is a picture of the Guan Yin at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. So, Jolene, we went and saw this together in Kansas City. She was very kind and picked me up and took me down to, and then we also took a road trip a few years ago. Asked her and the group We went to Kansas. Maybe it's time for us to do another road trip to Kansas City.
Yes.
Yes, when it cools down.
Even though China, you can't find the picture like this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mostly they've been destroyed and
Much
they lost. And our country give the most beautiful thing here. How great we are.
So both the monastics and the practitioners, we can lay people, we can transform our own mind, and we can take up the vows to become a bodhisattva. We can make that choice, make a decision. And that's the third type of bodhisattva. The person who has made a decision, I would like to be of benefit to all beings. I want to practice mindfulness meditation. I want to unify shamatha and vipassana, and I want to travel along the path of the 9 abiding minds. I want to practice the highest of modes. I want to practice the 6 perfections. I want to practice the 52 stages. I want to be of benefit to all beings without any preference or desire for reward. This is most important. The most important thing is to practice in this way. So everything else fades away and this becomes the most important practice. So one of the things that we become aware of is that when we suffer a lot, it's because of our selfishness, our conceit, our self-grasping and cherishing, and this delusion that this self is somehow exists on its own. This mistake that we make is something that we would like to empty the mind of. If we're able to do that, the mind doesn't become a stick of celery. We get rid of this now, the mind is just a vegetable. No, the mind starts to fill itself up with different practices. One of the practices is to cultivate the mind of loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So these are the first stages where we begin to see that the seeds of our practice are growing. We begin to see that we're reacting. Instead of being angry and upset by experiences, we begin to recognize, oh, it's better to have loving kindness, better to have compassion. We can respond in this way in no matter what happens. This is very, very helpful. So we notice when something happens and challenges us, and we lose that loving kindness. Somebody cuts in front of us in line. A car jumps in front of us and frightens us. A difficulty occurs, we go to the doctor and we find out we have an illness. We lose something very important to ourselves. Something breaks down. All of these experiences that we have that are difficult, we begin to react intuitively, just instinctively, instead of the old way of getting angry and upset and frustrated and complaining. We respond with a mind that is full of loving kindness and compassion. This is very different than the usual mind. This is the evolution, the natural evolution of the mind, to move to become more and more compassionate. If we study the brain, we see that the brain has been evolving. The brain at one time, the brains of the world were dominated by lizards, dinosaurs. They just didn't have very much compassion at all. Then, even towards their own young, they would eat their own young. They had no, if they were hungry and their baby was there, they just ate it. So they had very little compassion. Then the brain developed, and birds and mammals begin to develop, and the brain gets a little bit more of a sense, oh, I have to teach my young birds how to fly. I have to provide them with food. If they get hurt, I stand over their body and I guard them. So this becomes a higher level of compassion. And then as the mind develops more and more, we have greater ability to have this loving kindness and compassion. Eventually, all human beings will be transformed and we will become tathagatas. We will be a different species. Instead of responding the way that we do now, we will have a higher level of awareness and we'll treat each other very differently. And we won't have these kinds of fights that we have now. We won't have political arguments like we have now, because the mind will be at a higher level. Let's take good care of our bodies so we can all see that in the next few hundred years. So one of the areas that I'm going to be focusing on is how everything links to the Diamond Sutra. And the reason I'm going to use the Diamond Sutra as a reference point is because we've been studying the Diamond Sutra here at Maba for the last several months. And the Diamond Sutra is, in fact, the sutra that is fundamental to the charm practice. It's really evolved so that we can really understand the teachings of all of Chan Buddhism really from the point of view. Now this is not to say that we shouldn't also study the other sutras. We certainly can look at the Lankavatara Sutra that speaks to the illusion, the illusory nature of reality, of what we think is reality. We can study the Heart Sutra that speaks to the emptiness. This is very, very helpful. We can also study, however, the deep teachings of the Diamond Sutra that have so much to do with learning how not to grasp, how to become less attached to this idea of grasping for things. So, the Diamond Sutra talks about that, also talks about the Bodhisattva path, and how the Bodhisattva is one who gives without attachment to any result. And there's a logic in the Diamond Sutra of understanding that what is also is not, and that's why it's called what is. This is a very important understanding of the difference between just knowing something with words and knowing something from the deepness of your own being. It also talks about a self-view, a person view, a living being view, a lifespan view that are all empty and we can't attach to any of those things. This is the natural tendency of mind to say, this is who I am, this is what I own, this is my life. All of those things the mind wants to attach to this. This is my personality. This tendency to attach to those things just brings us lots of suffering. We'll try to understand that, how that happens, and how not to grasp in that way. Just in the same way that a child learns, don't put your hand on the hot plate. Don't put your hand on a burner of the stove. Don't stick your finger in the socket. Unfortunately, human beings, not understanding the Dharma, they do just that. They stick their fingers right where they're going to be hurt. And they think that and then they call it pleasure. Everything is a dream, a bubble, a flash of lightning, the Diamond Sutra says. So we can look at things from that point of view as well. So, this is from the Diamond Sutra. Subhuti, if anyone says that the Buddha has spoken of a self-view, a person view, a living being view, or a lifespan view, has that person understood my meaning? No, world-honored one, such a person has not understood the Tathagata. Why? What the Tathagata calls a self-view, a person view, a living being view, or a lifespan view are not, in essence, a self-view, a person view, a living being view, or a lifespan view. That is why they are called a self-view, a person view, a living being view, or a lifespan view. So, when we become good Dharma teachers, we have some insight and awareness and realization of these different views. So I'll try to during this period of us being together, trying to help us to understand these four views and why they're so troublesome to us. Also in the Diamond Sutra, it says, all composed things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, a shadow, a drop of dew, a flash of lightning. That is how to meditate on them. That is how to observe them. This is very deep. So all the teachings actually refer back to the original discourses of the Buddha. When we use the word sutta, as I explained before, this sutta refers to the original teachings. The word sutra refers to those teachings that came afterwards, sometimes 500-600 years after the Buddha lived. And these sutras are attributed to the Buddha. They're stories in which the Buddha is there. Now we don't know exactly who wrote these, whether they're actually discovered and then translated into Sanskrit. We have no understanding of that. We do know that the people who provided us with these sutras, those folks had taken a vow, of course, not to lie. So it would be very unusual for a person to say, okay, this is a teaching of the Buddha, and they made it up themselves. So we don't know exactly how these teachings came into being, but we know that these Mahayana sutras are consistent with the teachings, the original teachings. People can check. You can check yourself. You say, okay, the Buddha said in the later teachings, in the sutra, that things are like a bubble, like a phantom. Where could he have come up with these ideas of mirage? So you can go back and check in the phone discourse. Here it says directly, on one occasion the Blessed One was staying among the Johns in the bank of the Ganges River. There he addressed the monks. Monks, suppose that a large glob of foam were floating down the Ganges River, and a man with good eyesight were to see it, observe it, and appropriately examine it. To him, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in a glob of foam? In the same way, a monk sees, observes, and appropriately examines any form that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near. To him, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in form? Now suppose in the autumn, when it is raining, a fat, heavy drop, a water bubble will appear and disappear in the water, and a man with good eyesight will see it, observe it, and appropriately examine it. To him, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, and without substance. And so on. Suppose a person in that last month of the hot season of mirage were shimmering in the same way. So you can see that the actual terminology that is used in the Diamond Sutra refers back to the original teachings. Now, I'm going to say something, but very important for Master not to hear this. So, in many of the very many of the schools, Tibetan schools, Japanese schools, it doesn't depend upon what culture they're from. In many of the teachings, the teacher gives only the account of his or her lineage, and teaches, like if you go to the schools of the Dalai Lama, many times the Gelugpa schools, all they'll teach you is everything that starts with Tsongkhapa. And that's basically what they will teach you. Maybe if you're lucky, they'll go back in the Kagyu tradition, they'll go back to Milarepa, something like that. But you won't go and refer back and make the connection to the original school teachings of the Buddha. The only teacher that I have found, and I've looked a lot. I mean, I hadn't gone to every teacher, but I've looked around a lot. I'm very fortunate to have a teacher here in the Midwest who makes sure that we learn the original teachings of the Buddha and connect those teachings to the Mahayana tradition. That we don't just study the Mahayana tradition without seeing how it connects back to the original teachings of the Buddha. So I feel very, very grateful to Master. Very grateful to Master for his inspiration to make sure that we study the original teachings. So when you come and study here and you study the original teachings and you connect it, you'll find when you go out into the world and you meet someone who's been studying and they know a lot, when they may not know this connection. Where's Hillary? Hillary has studied in many different places. Do I speak the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Nope.
Sharon? Do I speak the truth?
My Tibetan teachers refer back.
Your Tibetan teachers refer back? Yes. Oh, Ninimba. Very good, yes. Yes, okay. Yes.
My personal experience, you are speaking.
Okay. Go back.
That's my experience.
Because you studied in the Soto tradition, right?
Yeah,
So-
so they only teach to their master, what their master taught.
Right? Yes, this is true. So Sherry's been very fortunate to have a good teacher.
I would say so.
Yes, please say
The Dalai
something.
Lama told me that he wanted all the Pali Sutras translated to Tibetan.
Okay. Because they need to do this more. Right. So we're very fortunate. How much time do I have?
You have about 10 more minutes, Don.
2 more minutes?
10.
Oh, 10 more minutes? Okay. So I was going to talk about the disenchanted, but I think that this should wait for another time, and I'm going to forward on and talk a little bit about, I'm going to introduce to you Nagarjuna. Now, Nagarjuna, to understand Nagarjuna, you have to have you have to have a lot of medication, a lot of patience, because Nagarjuna is very deep. So this is Nagarjuna. Neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause, does anything whatsoever anywhere arise. There are 4 conditions: efficient condition, percept object condition, immediate condition, dominant condition, just so. There is no 5th condition. Now, J. Garfield's translation of this is really very good. I can tell you that from my experience of looking into his commentary, the commentary does not help so much in some regards. There are some limitations to his commentary. And when I called him on the phone to ask him about this particular point, he quickly got off the phone, so he couldn't talk. And when I talked to Dan Westhouse about this, he explained to me that you can't use terms like this very effectively because it doesn't really make sense. You have to go back and really study the actual words in the Sanskrit and in the Chinese, and to understand how to penetrate into the meaning, because the English words really don't make any sense. So now you're stuck with the fact that we don't know Pali, may or may not know Chinese, and so we're really stuck in trying to understand even the first 2 verses of Nagarjuna become very difficult to understand. So in our course, I'm going to try my best to give you some insight along the way as to what the meanings of these conditions are and how this links to helping us not grab on to our experience the way that we usually do. You know that when the Buddha had his Great Awakening of the 12 Links of Dependent Origination. This was the moment at which he had enlightenment. He sat for 7 days under the Bodhi tree, not for 49 days. 7 days under the Bodhi tree. Then he moved to the banyan tree. He had to go to the bathroom. So he had to move to the banyan tree. Then after 7 days he moved to another tree and to another tree. This is told in great detail by Upali, the one who wrote the Vinaya. And so when the Buddha had this great awakening for 7 days, he contemplated the 12 links going forward, and then for 7 days, the 12 links going backwards. And when he taught the teaching of right view, he taught about the 12 links of dependent origination. This is the essence of understanding our grasping. When a layperson, a normal, regular person, begins to have awareness of the 12 links, usually it's right at link number 8. This is grasping. And link number 9, clinging. We become aware that the mind wants to grab onto things. And we are aware that when the mind has something, it doesn't want to let it go. We see it in our material awareness. We see it in our holding on to our lifespan. We see it when someone gives us anything of value, whether it's a teaching or anything along those lines. Love. We want to hold on to it. We don't want to let it go. So this is the first awareness that most of us will be at the moment of grasping. So hopefully we can investigate this grasping a little bit more. The Diamond Sutra speaks about letting go of this tendency that we have to grasp onto things. And as a Dharma teacher, we have to learn about how to let go. It's more important than all of the intellectual knowledge is to be able to actually learn how to let go. Because at the moment of our passing, we have to this letting go is something that happens in each moment. Every moment of breath when we inhale, and every moment of breath when we exhale. If we only inhale. So we learn about the causes and conditions that affect the mind so much that we have this tendency to grasp onto things. This is what Nagarjuna wanted to teach. Because he had discovered that in India, people had become super intellectual, or they became solitary. They went to the two extremes. They either went off and practiced by themselves, not interested in helping any other people, or they only debated and discussed and intellectually tried to grasp onto things that way. And Nagarjuna saw this was not the right path. So he had to penetrate more deeply to help people understand a middle way. This means Madhyamaka means middle way. So that's the beginning, the origin of Mahayana practice, middle way practice. We'll also, during our time together, become aware of some of the teachings of Vasubandhu. So Madhyamaka of Nagarjuna and the Yogacara of the Sangha and I need to go a little bit further. We'll understand the teachings of what Vasubandhu and Sangha talk about in Yogacara Buddhism. So You'll also learn how to pronounce this. It took me 2 years to learn how to pronounce this. Vijnati Matrata Siddhi Trimstika. Long time to learn how to pronounce that. So we'll learn how to pronounce this, and we will understand a little bit about the Chungwei Sholan and about the teachings of and how they connect to Chan practice, how it connects to the Diamond Sutra. So there's one verse in Vasubandhu's 30 verses. Now remember that Nagarjuna in the 1st century, he was the 14th in the lineage of those who were the greatest masters. They called them patriarchs. So he was number 14. Number 21 is Vasubandhu. 7 more later, number 28 is Bodhidharma, the one who brings this teaching from India to China. Tracy didn't get to Bodhidharma yet. So Vasubandhu writes, he's talking about the consciousness. And he says that it's always accompanied by the 4 klishas, or vexing passions, afflictions. These are greed, hatred, and delusion. And this is always accompanied by self-delusion, self-belief, self-conceit, and self-love. We'll see that these 4 views here are the same 4 views that are talked about in the Diamond Sutra. And just a slight variation, things get a little bit transferred in terms of the first 2. Because in the Xuankuan version, he starts in one sequence, and in the original, it's in a different sequence, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we understand this course. And we'll see how the different sutras explain being able to let go of this tendency of the mind to grasp onto things in this way. That we have this self. So we'll try to understand this in a little bit deeper way, and how there is this part of our consciousness, its main job is to, before it's transformed, its main job is to create a sense of self. This is what this part of the consciousness called the manas. This is what it does, and it has a 4-fold action that tries to seal our mind up so that we believe that our self is so important. It's the most important thing. We have to take care of it, and if anybody else challenges the self, we have to fight. So this is on 4 different levels of redundancy, this consciousness demands our attention at all times. This is who I am. This is what I own. This is what's important about me. My life, I have to defend it. And we can begin to see how this can actually be transformed. That this tendency to hold on in this way is like a pitchfork to us. It causes us tremendous distress, and we can transform it. When that happens, the mind no longer has to grasp in this way, and we're truly free from this kind of distress. So this is what we want to learn about the Mahayana path. Plus how to pronounce things. So, first, when we practice, be aware. When am I being selfish? When am I thinking of myself as being so important? When am I cherishing myself more important than others? When do I think that my personality, myself, really exists? And then try to apply loving kindness and compassion to yourself and to all others. try to make this transformation in your mind, then you become a person who is living the Dharma. Then when you live the Dharma, teaching the Dharma is not so difficult because you're just doing it. Then it becomes no effort. Learning all of the words that are associated with it, this is just extra. So I want to thank you all very much. Let's dedicate our practice together in the traditional way of the Bodhisattva practice. May all beings have happiness in the process of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering in the process of suffering. May all beings never be separated from that altruistic joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion,